Hello everyone, welcome to Multinational Business Management Week 12 lecture. This is Mia Ho. In this lecture video, we will first of all finish the lecture on internationalization strategies before moving on to the lecture theme of global market opportunity assessment, which then give you a comprehensive framework in conducting analysis on target country selection and foreign move choices in your international expansion projects. In the last lecture, we spent much time discussing overarching questions, how do firms internationalize? And to answer this question, you will introduce these foreign move classifications by my own, and you have known that there are two broad types of foreign move choices, so-called FDI and ISA. And the major distinction between these two depends very much on whether a company has chosen to do it alone or partner with someone else in its internationalization process. If the company chooses the former option, that means FDI, it must make much effort, investing a lot of resources in foreign country by physical presence. But if the company chooses the later option, it can leverage the other company's resources to achieve the same internationalization objective. We talked about the management issues involving in FDI in the last lecture. If you can recall well, you will know that the most critical determinant of FDI management, essentially in terms of its performance, would be location. Then what about international strategic alliances? How can we better manage ISAs, which would be the international collaboration between firms across national boundaries? Then here is a managerial framework of ISAs from the textbook. This framework provided in the textbook tries to systemize everything that involving in alliance management. So obviously the first step is that as a firm manager, to think about that whether I should really enter a ISA relationship with some other company across national boundaries. So if you chose to do international collaboration, essentially means that the next step you need to decide on which type of the ideal partner, what kind of relationship you want to build upon, and you start screening the qualified partner candidates. Sometimes company may have 3 to 5 candidates in their shortlist, and then you determine the nature of your legal relationship with the prospective partner before the negotiating process. And usually in the negotiation process, a company will decide that what kind of agreements or what kind of terms that should be involved in their relationship. Okay, sometimes it could be a formal agreement, or maybe it's just informal or oral agreements by their own. Okay, and once you enter the agreement, starting to collaborating with each other, of course, during the process, you need to build your trust, empathy, and reciprocity with the partner. Okay, so that's much more related to relational-based view in the literature. And then once you have built a relationship with the partners and you started your collaboration for quite some time, of course you need to establish explicit criteria for major intervention performers, and before you decided whether or not you're going to sustain a relationship with the partner. Okay, so that will be the final step to monitor and measure performance and make plans to develop long-term goals. Okay, so I just briefly introduce the model for you, and you think that the model is perfect, right? And it is stated in the textbook, but the cruel truth is that even for a manager that have done all the 8 steps specified in the model, a successful alliance performance cannot be guaranteed in the real life. Why? Because any of the steps can have certain influence on the alliance cooperation. Okay, and in real life is that it's really complicated to manage a good alliance performance, and I will explain why in the following slides. Okay, so this is the simplified version of the model with the last one. So from the literature perspective, prior research has largely drawn upon the ISA management issues, and they generally agreed upon the linear logic of the framework, just as the same logic you've seen in the last slide. For instance, they all believe that the results of partner selection will influence on the negotiation process between the potential collaborating firms, And such negotiation process will then influence the following interpartner interactions within alliances. And finally, all these factors will significantly influence on the collaborative performance of an ISA. But in reality, managing international strategic alliances is rather difficult and far from certain. This simple linear framework can't capture the full picture of the alliance performance, because I believe that any of the stage informing ISAs can impact on the collaborative performance by the end. In other words, it's rather interactive relationship among these stages, but rather a linear process as categorized in existing literature. So, give you some statistics to know more about the dynamic nature of ISA management. So, despite the popularity of alliance formation, however, the average lifespan of alliances is just 5 to 7 years, and nearly 80% of the alliances ultimately end in a sale by one of the partners. So that means that more than 80% of the alliances are perceived as the gateway for mergers acquisitions. But why is that? Why do you think most companies form international strategic alliances before conducting mergers acquisition? This is the first question in your individual handout. Well, a practical concern is that making M&A decision is usually very risky for companies. In particular, if you are merging or acquiring a private company with no public information or financial data available for evaluation. Companies will lower down their risks by forming alliances, prolonging their evaluation and assessment processes on the target partner. During the cooperative period, they have more access to the partner information and see if it is really worth it buying it. If the cooperation goes well and the firm found out the target partner does have certain valuable assets if acquired, then the merger acquisition deal is mature and considered to be proceeded. But from a management perspective, achieving sound alliance performance has not always been an easy task, considering there are more than 2 firms involving in a cooperation, which might result in a potential divergence of strategic objective of alliances between collaborating firms. It makes sense a lot if we perceive alliances as partnership between individuals. You and your partner may have different objectives while getting along, right? And according to a survey conducted by Dyer et al. Back in 2004, which was a bit old, but it spoke the truth even to date, that over 82% of the companies undertaking strategic alliances admitted that there were 2 different ways of achieving the same goals if the cooperation involves at least 2 partners. But at the present stage, we still have very limited understanding of how to better manage ISAs. And this is where the research gap I want to fill in the past decade started with my doctoral research. Okay, so in my doctoral thesis, I wanted to unpack the black box alliance performance by conceptualizing the underlying assumptions. So as I mentioned earlier that most prior research argued the linear relationship among the determinants of ISAs, but I'm not a big fan of that argument. I believe an alliance performance is influenced by the simultaneous interactions among 3 levels of factors, including alliance activities, partner firms, and their contextual factors or their external environments, domestically and internationally. So here I coined as the convolution view on international strategic alliance performance in this model. So based on such a theoretical framework, I have developed several streams of my own research in the past decade. Well, I tend not dig into these research topics because you will get bored easily. But the main takeaway from here is the dynamic nature of ISA management, because the outcome of international collaborations are controlled by more than 1 partner firm. So you not only need to take into account the dynamic partner interactions, such as the bargaining power between partners or the relationship between them, and sometimes the numbers of partners will complicate the tension, the relationship between each other. You also need to consider the contextual factors, where the partners originate in terms of cultural, institutional, or economic differences between partners certainly will influence their interactions and the cooperative performance. Not to mention the nature of international collaboration, What sort of alliance activities are involved in the cooperation? Is it simple as buyer-supply exchanges, or complicated as joint venture involving equity investment and control issues? All of which posing impacts on the alliance performance for sure. This indicates that you as an IB manager engaging in ISAs will need to be comprehensive and adaptable in response to the interaction effects of these three-dimensional factors in the model, which is my model, by the way. Okay, now we finished the lecture on internationalization strategies. Let's move on to the next lecture theme about global market opportunity assessment, which is a very useful framework in your report write-up in your international expansion project regarding the foreign market selection process. And the major questions we are going to explore in the following is how to assess global market opportunity, right? So imagine that if you are the firm manager and your firm is now facing a critical issue that whether or not your company should go international in certain foreign markets. So what you need to evaluate this decision is to have a set of criteria, examine if your proposal to go international in certain countries is viable. Therefore, what you can learn from today's lecture video is the practical tool of global market opportunity assessment. And to answer this big question, let's start from the definition of global market opportunity. Basically, a global market opportunity is a favorable combination of circumstances, locations, and timing that offer prospects for international business activities, such as exporting, investing, sourcing, or partnering in foreign markets. Any sort of IB activities can be expected. And the typical opportunities, as you can see on the slides, for instance, once a company chose the locations, it may perceive opportunity to sell its product and services, establish factories or other production facilities to produce its offerings more cheaply or more competently, procure raw materials, components, or services of lower cost of superior quality, or perhaps enter beneficial collaboration with the foreign partners. But after all, how can we assess global market opportunities? There are 6 major tasks that are necessary to assess global opportunities, as you can see on the slides. So including analyzing organizational readiness to internationalize, assessing the suitability of the firm's product or services for the foreign markets, screening the countries to identify target markets, assessing industry market potential, choosing foreign business partners, and finally, estimating company sales potential. This framework is very important in today's lecture, and we should look at each task in detail. So the first task is to analyze organizational readiness to internationalize. So when assessing the firm's readiness to internationalize, managers peer into the organizations to determine the degree of motivation, resources, and skills necessary to successfully engage in international business by a SWOT analysis. And believe you will be familiar with this model. So by SWOT analysis, managers can easily recognize what are the resources and capabilities the firm has to internalize and what are the deficiencies and how it can improve these deficiencies to fulfill internationalization. It can also perceive the potential external opportunities and threats for its internationalization. Therefore, SWOT analysis is indeed a very useful analytical tool for firms to examine its current status and based on the analytical results to improve its status quo. Here are some simple questions to address in organizational readiness analysis. So basically, when you finished the SWOT analysis, you need to think about a follow-up question like this. For instance, what does the firm hope to gain from international business? For example, is it want to increase the sales or profits, to challenge their competitors, or just to pursue a globalization or localization strategy? Secondly, is international business expansion consistent with other company goals, now or in the future? And thirdly, what demands will internationalization place on company resources, such as finance, personnel, or manufacturing capacity? How well the company meet such demands? And finally, what is the basics of the firm's competitive advantage? So you can address these questions throughout your SWOT analysis results and think about that whether or not the company actually fulfill the demands to go international markets. So companies seek competitive advantages by doing things better than their competitors. Competitive advantages can be based on very strong R&D, superior input goods, cost-effective or innovative manufacturing capacity, or maybe just a skillful marketing and highly effective distribution channels or other capabilities that company own to engage in the international competition. And you have to note that assessing organizational readiness to internationalize is an ongoing process. So managers need to continuously verify the firm's ability to modify its product or services to suit conditions, needs, and tastes of customers in foreign markets. By asking these questions, the firm can further understand its readiness for internationalization. Well, the second task is to assess the suitability of the firm's product or services for foreign markets. So when analyzing the suitability of their product or services, company must first consider whether their potential customers actually desire these products, and then consider how they will deliver these products. Are there existing factors that would make sales difficult? To answer these questions, they will conduct a systematic assessment of company offerings, evaluate the fit between the offerings and the foreign customer needs, identify the factors that may hinder market potential, determine how the offerings may need to be adapted for each individual market, and finally assess the offering in terms of foreign customer characteristics, laws and regulations, channel intermediary requirements, and also the nature of the competitors in that target market. So this is a practical examples of Levi's. I think everybody knows about this brand. So in marketing its diamond jeans, for example, Levi's assess its ability to adapt its product for various markets. In evaluating entry into Islamic countries, Levi's discovers that women are discouraged from wearing tight-fitting clothing. So the firm made a line of loose-fitting jeans. When targeting consumers in hot climates, Levi's also evaluated its ability to produce shorts and thinner diamond in bright colors. Well, however, how can we know if the product or services are suitable for international markets? Here shows the product or services with the best international prospects tend to have the following 4 characteristics. The first one is that usually product or services sells well at home are likely to succeed abroad. For instance, Microsoft Xbox and Apple iPhones are international hits, mainly because they are sold very well in the United States. Secondly, this kind of product or services usually cater to universal needs. For example, buyers worldwide demand personal care products, medical devices, and banking services, such as cancer drugs, energy-efficient refrigerators and kitchen appliances, so on and so forth. Thirdly, they may address the need not well served in particular foreign markets. Potential may exist in countries where the product or services does not currently exist, or where demand is just starting to emerge. For example, in early days, we Taiwanese did not have coffee habits, and it was Uni-President, the mother company of 7-Eleven, to bring in Starbucks in Taiwan to build a coffee culture in Taiwanese society. And also, the invention of tablets and flat-screen TVs are the same. These products are invented to serve new markets, and they are now the main drivers of high-tech industries worldwide. And finally, this kind of product services usually address a new or emerging needs abroad. Demands for some product or services can suddenly emerge after disaster or emergent trends. For example, a major earthquake in Nepal created an urgent need for easy-to-build housing, and AIDS in Africa creates needs for drugs and medical supplies. Not to mention, we have pandemic issue right now, so there's emergent needs of the vaccinations and also the treatment drugs. Well, similarly, if you are the IB managers and you want to examine whether your offerings in terms of product or services are suitable for foreign customer needs, these are some follow-up questions you may want to ask for yourself. For instance, who initiated purchasing? Who are the potential customers? Secondly, who uses the product or services? Sometimes the initial customers may not be the user of the product or services, so bear it in mind. Thirdly, why do people buy the product or services? Where do people purchase the product or services? It's about the delivery or distribution channel issues. And finally, what kind of economic, cultural, geographic, and other factors in target market may limit the sales? So we thought about the challenges in the target markets. And to answer these questions, the best cost-effective ways is to ask intermediaries or the local partners in target markets about the local demands for it. Or maybe just attend industrial trade fair for interviewing prospective customers or distributors. The next task is to screen the countries to identify the target markets. So when screening the countries to identify target markets, it means that companies reduce the number of the countries that warrant in-depth investigation to a manageable few. They usually identify 5 or 6 countries that hold the best potential by assessing each country according to their size and growth rates, the market intensities, that means the customer buying power, the consumption capacity, maybe the size and growth rate of middle class could be the indicator. The country's receptivity to imports, infrastructure for doing businesses, or the economic freedom the country risk indicators. And sometimes companies also examine the criteria such as population, income, demographic characteristics, government stability, and nature of the general business environment in individual countries if they think they are very important indicators for their assessments. And these statistics usually span several years, help determine which markets are growing or which are shrinking. And they can purchase related research reports from professional market research consultancy firms that provide assessment of the key statistics for particular markets. So just think about that, why you need to do the global database mini presentations in the first place, especially in the first half of this course. This is how you construct a database that provides you with the assessment criteria to screen the countries to identify the target markets in your international expansion projects. And overall, when considering which locations to go abroad, you as IB managers need to take the internationalization strategies developed by your firm into account. Because obviously, different internationalization strategies such as exporting, FDI or ISAs are suitable for different target markets. And similarly, different locations may require you to develop different internationalization strategies in accordance with the characteristics of particular markets. The task 4 is to assess industry market potential. So after you finished selecting the target markets, now we get down into the industry level. What is industry market potential? It is basically estimates of likely sales for all firms in particular industry over a specific period. And companies usually assess the market potential for each country that develops a 3 to 5 years sales forecast, which include the size and growth rate of the market and industry trends, tariff or non-tariff trade barriers to the market entry, any standards or regulations to affect the industry development and growth, availability and sophistication of distribution channels, whether or not they exist, and the unique customer requirements and preferences. Of course, there will be the marketing issues. And finally, is there any industry-specific market potential indicators? And personally, I think the last one is the most important indicators when you assess and to screen the countries in the industry level analysis. So here are some examples of industry-specific indicators depending on the product or services the company offers. So if your company actually selling cameras, this kind of companies usually examine the climate-related factors such as the average number of sunny days in a typical year, because people usually don't want to go out and take pictures during the raining days. But it might not be the case for now, because now we all take pictures via our smartphones, right? And secondly, if your company happen to sell laboratory equipment, you may examine the government expenditures on healthcare in target markets, because laboratory equipment are usually quite expensive and they can only be built by government as a public goods. If the government in target markets is rather poor or unwilling to buy the laboratory equipment, the company might not enter the market for the sake of revenue generation. And next one is about the cooling equipment. So if your company happen to sell this kind of cooling equipment, you may examine the number of institutional buyers, such as the number of restaurants, hotels in the target markets, because they are the major buyers of your products. And finally, I think everybody is interested in that, is that if you are selling alcohol in international markets, you may examine the unique customer preferences, of course, including the frequency of drinking in their target markets. Well, we know about the indicators involving in the industry level analysis, but how can companies estimate the industry market potential in practices? This table summarizes various sites useful for estimating industry market potential, and of course, these databases, public data sources, are also very useful to assess various statistics for conducting market opportunity assessments and other international business research. And as I highlighted in yellow color, you can see that the most useful source for international business research is the database of World Bank, which is the one you've been used in the global database mini presentation, this kind of assignments. And of course, most companies now don't do research by their own. Instead, they hire external consultancies such as McKinsey and BCG to do the analysis for them. But such consultancy usually charges high services fee for the customized services. You have to bear in mind. The next task is to choose the foreign business partners. So after examining industry market potential, companies then decide on which business partner in the foreign country would be the best. They assess the select partners based on criteria as listed in the slides. They must decide on the type of foreign business partner, clarify ideal partner qualifications, and crave an appropriate market entry strategy. And some considerations that must be analyzed are the value-adding activities that the partner should have, and which potential partner has the most expertise and internal strengths to help the expansion. Business partners are critical to success in international business. And one of the most important decisions for the firm is to identify the ideal qualifications of potential business partners. And the firm should seek a good fit in terms of both strategy, such as whether or not they have the common goals and objective and internationalization, and also resources, whether or not they have complementary core competencies and value chain activities. It is helpful to anticipate a potential degree of synergy with the prospective partners for the intermediate term, usually 3 to 6 years into the future. And the final task in the global market opportunity assessment is to estimate the company's sales potential. Company sales potential is an estimate of the share of annual industry sales that the firm expects to generate in a particular target markets. This estimate of future potential revenue is a very challenging task because it requires obtaining highly refined information from the market, and the company must project their revenues and expenses for the next 3 to 5 years into the future. Here is the framework for estimating company sales potential in the foreign markets. So you can see how complex of the framework is, but it is sensible because this is the final task to assess global market opportunity, and companies need to have well-rounded considerations on the company sales potential based on the results of previous 5 tasks we've been mentioned earlier. So you've known all the tasks involved to implement global market opportunity assessment via this framework. But what do you think about the GNOA framework we've been talking about throughout the lecture? Do you think it is useful and applicable to all types of companies? This is another question in your individual handouts. And to answer the questions, here I'm going to show you another video. This is a video from Harvard Business Review website, and it offers suggestions for companies to find the next growth markets, okay, which is quite different perspective from if you learn about the GNOA framework today. And so you can have a look about the video and think about the question I just gave to you. You might have different reflections on the GNOA framework after you watch the video.
Finding that first market, a few customers willing to pay for your product, is hard enough. But there's one thing that may even be harder, which is finding the second or third market that will keep your company growing, especially when you're also still focused on protecting what you already have. In 1996, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple, I was in charge of a division that got products into retail stores like Best Buy. We'd increased a $2 million business to $180 million in 18 months. It was the most profitable part of Apple at the time. And yet Steve was unimpressed. Even though the web and its related forces were just peeking around the corner, Steve could see it would allow a more direct relationship between brands and their customers, and that we shouldn't keep relying on intermediaries. That experience taught me something, that the best business leaders manage the present while also inventing the future. You can't just lead your current business, you also have to create your next business. And to do that, you have to embrace a certain amount of discomfort. Here's how. First, know your purpose. You can't find a second market unless you know who you serve and why. This will help focus your efforts. For instance, Apple ended up defining itself not by its hardware or its software, but by its design. At Apple, intuitive, simple design became a compact between the company, its employees, and its customers. Design was more than a product, it was a purpose. Second, figure out what you need to learn. Commit to a process of identifying the unique abilities you have now and the ones you'll want to grow within a decade from now. The knowledge you need for future growth may not exist at your firm yet, and that's okay. Set aside time to explore seemingly crazy ideas and experiment with what could be. At this stage, don't worry about whether these experiments will scale. That will hamstring you before you even get started. Next, learn to unlearn. One of the most common mistakes I see is measuring new projects by old assumptions and metrics. You can't do that with a new line of business. Start by recognizing which past standards aren't useful for the future and make sure you unlearn them. Now, pilot, invest, experiment. Structure your pilot projects so you learn as you go, iterating towards what works. Peter Sims calls this little bets. Rita McGrath calls it discovery-driven planning. Whatever you call it, it's a good idea. Finally, make sure to reward learning and cooperation. Tie people's bonuses to the experimenting, learning, and new areas of growth. This can greatly reduce the kind of behavior that blocks change. To grow new markets, you can't keep doing the same old thing. Pushing yourself into the new territory can be incredibly uncomfortable. But when you learn to live with that discomfort and use it as fuel for growth, that's when you'll invent the future.
So, after watching the video, what do you think about the question? And I'm intrigued to see your answer in your individual handouts. But personally, I think GNOA framework is very useful for companies to internationalize in target markets, but it has certain drawbacks. For instance, it is a rather static approach, ignoring the changing nature of international environments. If you really look into the analysis, you can see that the model seems to neglect the external environment analysis. And secondly, it has really limited application to the new international ventures, such as the born global companies, e-businesses with completely new product or services in the markets. So from the video we just watched, it is important to know when to unlearn certain things encountered by firms. Unlearning is a critical concept, and it refers to unlearn certain things that are unnecessary or redundant information for companies to go international. This implies that although the general framework is very useful and encompasses so many considerations for companies to go international, it is not suitable for all conditions. When applying general framework, companies should adapt the framework to best suit their necessities, and such application with adaptation would then contribute to successful internationalization. So let's use a case to reflect what you've just learned from today's lecture and answer these questions in your individual handouts. This case is concerned with a Canadian multinational called Avigilon. So let's watch the video first, and then you can think about the two questions on the slide.
Global video surveillance market is a very large and rapid growing market. My name is Alexander Fernandez. I am the founder, president, and CEO of Avigilon Corporation. We manufacture ourselves here locally in North America for several reasons. First of all is quality control. So we're able to control our own destiny and control the user's experience. Secondly is one for cost. We run a very efficient operation. Thirdly is the speed at which we're able to move. Going from innovation to prototyping to a final product is much faster.
What makes Avigilon unique is that we're controlling every aspect of the manufacturing process. We do our automated circuit board assembly here. We do our camera unit assembly here. We do our network video recorder provisioning here.
We're able to access global markets, so we sell globally from here. It has this critical mass of developers, engineers, manufacturing expertise, and that comes down to the people. The people are the ones that actually make that plan into reality. You know, really there's just tremendous growth ahead of us. We're ramping up our manufacturing operations to keep up with demand. We strive for excellence, simply put.
So you can see this company is really a special one because unlike other multinationals, they try to outsource these value-adding activities in the foreign markets in order to lower down their production or manufacturing or even marketing costs. This company, they usually do everything purely in-house, that in their home market, Canada. Okay, so I also uploaded the two-page showcase about Avigilon's internationalization plan and their stories. Please have a look on it and then answer the two questions on the slide. So we basically finished the lecture theme today about the internationalization strategies and a general framework that teach you how to comprehensively construct a global market opportunity assessment analysis and to find the target markets for your client organization in the international expansion projects. And again, if you have any questions, please drop me an email or leave your comments on Google Classroom. I'm willing to help you to solve the problems. Thank you.